in the back seat of my Grandma Joyce's late 1980s model Mercury Grand Marquis with my sister. Our seat assignments are fixed and static, while my grandma and my mother alternate between driver and passenger in the front. The back seat feels massive compared to my little frame, and a world of space exists between me and my sister. The car itself feels even larger, and I estimate it to be about 100 feet long. I can smell the hints of tobacco ingrained in the soft fabric of the cloth seats. My lanky legs stretch down to the floor, and my little arms, draped in colorful friendship bracelets, are just long enough to playfully open and close the ashtray on the back of the driver's seat. And although I can barely see over the headrest, I am tall enough to see out of the back seat window, my primary vantage point as we embark on our annual family pilgrimage. See, my grandma's car always felt like a spaceship to me. And in many ways, it was a time machine, transporting my family through a portal to our past and our future, to the unknown and the familiar, to that which had been lost, and that which had been reclaimed, and that which was yet to be. It's the late 80s, and the night before the trip, my grandma's house is animated with excited energy and anticipation as we begin our annual voyage to Zanesville, Ohio, the birthplace of my grandma and my mom, and the central dwelling place for most of my maternal bloodline. Preparation for the trip was always a true production. My mom would spend hours meticulously braiding and twisting our hair, adorning our heads in a crown of colorful barrettes. She loved to dress us up for the trip, so our colorful short sets and white sneakers and matching sunglasses were set out the night before. Our backpacks were loaded with crayons and coloring books, word searches, and travel-sized Etch-a-Sketch, and electronic handheld games with extra batteries. A small cooler was packed with high-C fruit drinks, and snacks, everything that you needed to occupy small children for a 5.5-hour drive. Our suitcases were sat next to the front door, so that our only task in the morning was to carry them to the car. It was usually dark when we left home. My grandma preferred to travel in the morning. That meant we had to get up really early. So often before the sun was up, we loaded in the car and prepared for that trip. My grandma believed that traveling early in the morning was safer for our family, and she desired to arrive early so that we could maximize our time in Ohio. See, I learned at an early age that traveling late at night and early in the morning pointed back to a space and time when sundown towns and terrorism and violence were prevalent in both the North and the South. So my grandma, she preferred to vacation without aggravation, a term made popular in the Green Book, a guide used by African Americans to safely navigate the road in the segregated South. My grandfather used to tell us a terrifying story of an encounter with the Ku Klux Klan as he traveled on the interstate. My grandfather was fair-skinned, and at the right speed, it would be difficult for the KKK to discern his race. The caveat is that his brown-skinned babies were in the car with him. So as my grandfather drove his station wagon south, a group of white men clad in white hoods on horses traveled north at a hurried pace in what was sure to be a cataclysmic and violent encounter. Instead, my grandfather instructed his beautiful black babies to lay down on the ground, or lay down in the back of the station wagon and lay down on the floor. He drove backwards down the interstate at a high rate of speed until a safe enough distance existed for him to turn the car around and drive toward sanctuary. This and many encounters like it informed my family's travel habits and routines for decades. So in the early morning, when the dew is still on the grass, I buckle my metal seatbelt into the buckle, I check my digital watch to confirm our departure time, and I prepare for takeoff. I am excited to go on this trip, and I am excited to see my family. The large window allows me to see the transitions as we travel. My grandma and my mom point out cows and horses as we transition from darkness to sunlight and from city landscape to rolling green pastures of farmland. Catching a glimpse of the animals always excited me and sent my adrenaline rushing, because we usually had a short window of time to see their beauty before we passed them by. Our trip was filled with many stops and landmarks to help me understand how far we had traveled and how far the journey was ahead. We threw caution to the wind and normal dietary restrictions out the window when we made our first stop at a Wendy's restaurant after crossing the state line. I always felt a sense of freedom and rebellion when my grandmother allowed us to order junior cheeseburgers and chocolate Frosties at 8 a.m. in the morning. I would savor the rarity of the moment, making sure I peeled all the extra cheese off the foil wrapper, making sure that my cup was completely empty. Seeing the large sugar towers for Pioneer Sugar in Findlay, Ohio, let me know that we were close to Aunt Sue's house, a required stop on our journey. The loud sound of gospel music blaring from the television and the aroma of a home-cooked meal of fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, greens, and cornbread greeted us at the door before she did. See, Aunt Sue was my grandma's oldest sister, and she doted on her baby sister like big sisters often do. I watched in amazement as my grandma transformed into a younger version of herself, allowing someone to take care of her, to feed her, and to heap praise on her. And I watched in familiarity as my grandma and her sister laughed uncontrollably at their inside jokes, something that me and my sister did too. My grandma would throw her head back and slap her knee when the joke was especially funny. We usually spend about an hour at Aunt Sue's house, but man, did they pack a lot into those 60 minutes. And by the time we left, I knew all the church gossip. I knew which cousins were graduating and which ones barely made it. I knew that Aunt Sue's secret ingredient in all of her recipes was a stick of butter. In everything. And I knew that my family had overcome significant adversity as I listened to them talk about grief and loss and an abiding faith that had sustained them. I understood that there was a genuine love shared between them. And my grandma always seemed carefree and lighter after a visit with her sister. Southern Ohio can be surprisingly mountainous. And so as we traveled through peaks and valleys, my grandma would provide insight about which family members we would see and where they fit on our family tree. And even though we had been traveling for hours, I always seemed to get my second wind when we approached the final two hills before exiting the freeway. See, our time in Ohio was magical for me. And our arrival was the catalyst for barbecues and family gatherings where we shared memories and life updates. My uncles would show up in their new sports cars and their new sound systems, bumping the latest hip hop tracks like Special Ed's I Got It Made, or the classic Ladies First by Queen Latifah and Moni Love. And I would watch as my cousins excitedly opened the gifts that my grandma had brought them from Detroit. It seemed like time slowed down. There was always an abundance of food, and I was especially excited to eat fried green tomatoes because my grandfather had perfected the crunch. Right? We played for hours with my cousins, darts in my Uncle Craig's garage, volleyball in the side lot. We rehearsed dance routines for the impromptu talent show later that night, mimicking the hot dance moves from New Edition's latest music video. We chased fireflies at night, and we explored historic Putnam Avenue, learning about the network of safe houses along the Underground Railroad. When I wasn't playing, I sat on the porch with my grandma and the other adults while they sipped sun tea and shot the breeze. I was curious and inquisitive, and I wanted to take it all in. So I learned my family's history, like how my great uncle Hoppy played as a shortstop in the Negro Baseball League, or my grandfather's service in World War II and the tattoo on his bicep of a woman named Kate that he could no longer remember. Like, what was you doing, Granddad? But when my grandma spoke, I leaned in. As the matriarch, my grandma was the keeper of memories and traditions, and being in her hometown seemed to ignite a sense of ease and a slower pace in her demeanor. See, at home, my grandma worked 2 jobs, and she usually was making sure that everyone else was taken care of. Sometimes she seemed anxious and worried about things that were outside of her control. But on that porch, her eyes were lighter, her shoulders more relaxed. Her voice reflected happiness and joy. And if you listen close enough, you could hear a slight change in her dialect, a slow drawl. The same slow drawl I heard as we traveled around Zanesville. My grandma shared many stories and lessons. She could recall when my mom and all of her siblings took their first steps. She told us about my family's self-sufficiency and interdependence through gardening and raising chickens. She even told us about the time that my mom and all of her siblings got sprayed by a skunk and had to take a bath in tomato juice to remove the stench. But her most consistent stories starred her oldest sister, Mary, who raised her when their mom died prematurely. She spoke with deep reverence of her sister Mary, who took her in at the age of 2 and taught her about family, faith, and generosity. And I would listen to those stories as if it was my first time hearing them, even though I had heard them the year before, and I would hear them the year after. Before I knew it, a week had gone by, and it was time to return to Detroit. We always had breakfast at a Shoney restaurant with my family before we got back on the road, a final opportunity to break bread before my grandma piloted our spaceship back to Detroit. I would watch in amazement as she loaded the trunk with the comforts of home, Conn's plain potato chips, assorted chocolates from Bloomers, deli meats and cheese from the deli counter at Risebeck's, and mixtapes from my uncle with the latest and greatest R&B hits. And I promise y'all, we listened to Luther Vandross's Here and Now and Soul to Soul's Keep on Moving at least 1,000 times on our trip home. As I climbed into the back of my grandma's big Grand Marquis, and I buckled the metal seatbelt into the buckle, my small pockets were full of dum-dum suckers from the Shoney's candy tree, and my heart was full of enough experiences, memories, and lessons to last me a lifetime. See, for me, my grandma represents the development of my core values and my spiritual foundation, the continuity of family traditions, and the impetus for my family's migration to Detroit in the 60s. When I reflect on those trips with my grandma, I now know that I was being prepared to carry the torch, and that those trips were intentionally designed to connect me to my past in preparation for my future. See, at home, my grandma was my grandma, the host and master chef of holiday dinners and big family gatherings, the best gift giver. But in Ohio, I saw my grandma in multitudes. I saw her as little sister, auntie, daughter, classmate. More important than any role, I saw her embrace a sense of ease and a slower pace of life. See, I come from a long lineage of young matriarchs who have stood in the gaps as surrogate grandmas and moms. My grandma's older sister, Mary, was actually my biological grandmother, who stepped in to raise her siblings when their mother died prematurely at 34. 16 years later, when her sister Mary died, my grandma Joyce stepped in to make sure that her nieces and nephews were taken care of, including my mom. And when my own mom passed at the tender age of 40, I too stood in the gaps, making sure that my younger siblings were well taken care of. I learned to carry the torch. Those trips taught me the importance of family, generosity, and faith. When I look back, the most important lessons are not the things that my grandma told me. It's what she showed me that has informed my journey and my own transformative healing. How to rest, how to embrace a slower pace of life, how to welcome in ease, how to be present, how to savor the moment, and how to heal the scars of carrying the torch without setting myself on fire. Thank you.
Allandra, Bulger. Woo! She gave a word.